I want to begin this little Dharma talk with a reading from, this is not from scripture, this is from Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah was a Theravadan monk, very influential meditation teacher. He's usually described as being the founder of what's often called the Thai forest tradition, in that lineage. So this is from some of his writing. We can learn the Buddha's teachings from a tree. A tree is born due to a cause, and it grows following the course of nature until it buds, flowers, and bears fruit. Right here, the tree is discoursing the Buddha's teachings to us, but we don't understand this. We're unable to bring it within and contemplate, so we don't know that the tree is teaching us Dhamma. The fruit appears and we merely eat it without investigating. Sweet, sour, or bitter, it's the nature of the fruit. And this is the Dhamma, the teachings of the fruit. Then the leaves grow old and wither and die and fall from the tree. All we see is that the leaves have fallen down. We step on them, we sweep them up, that's all. We don't know that nature is teaching us. Later on, the new leaves sprout, and we merely see that without taking it further. This is not the truth that is known through internal reflection. If we can bring all this inward and investigate it, we will see that the birth of a tree and our own birth are no different. This body of ours is born and exists dependent on conditions, on the elements of earth, water, wind, and fire. Every part of the body changes according to its nature. It's no different from the tree. Hair, nails, teeth, and skin all change. If we know the things of nature, then we will know ourselves. So this Saturday, a group of us met over at Dysart Woods and did a little walking around. And for the sake of anyone who doesn't know what Dysart Woods is, and I'm primarily saying this part for folks who might be watching the video of this later on, who might not be local and might not know what Dysart Woods is. Dysart Woods is an area just a few miles from us here in Belmont County, Ohio, that is a very large forest area that contains, I thought it was the last, but I've actually read it's one of the last, some of the last stands of old-growth forest in the state of Ohio. In other words, trees that have never been cut down for lumber. They've just been allowed to grow in a totally natural way. So a group of us met there at the woods and did a little hiking and talking and getting to know each other and a little contemplation along the way. Having that experience reminded me a couple of years ago when the Zen Center was first getting started. I got asked by the city of St. Clairsville to speak at an Arbor Day event. And at first I said, yes, I'd be happy to do that. And then discovered my wife already had plans for us to be out of town on the weekend they were going to do it. So I had to beg off. I wasn't actually able to do it. But I definitely told them, you do this again, you let me know. I really, really want to do it. And to the best of my knowledge, it's never happened again. Actually, I'm not completely sure the one that they wanted me to talk at happened, to be absolutely honest, but they definitely never happened again, and they definitely never asked me to talk again. So, but I'd already been thinking about this. What would I say? How could I talk about an event, Arbor Day? It's dedicated to the trees, and I'm in there as a Buddhist priest, and what would be the appropriate thing to say? So I'd already been thinking about this. How are trees connected to our faith? In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is the story in the early Buddhist scriptures, the so-called Pali Canon, of the death of the Buddha, the final period of the Buddha's life and his death and what happened after his death. As the Buddha approached death, his followers at one point asked him, how should we remember you? What should we do when you're gone? What should we do to remember you? And one thing that he said was that one thing that people could do was to make pilgrimages to 4 important locations from his life. This list of 4 places in the Korean Sun tradition that this temple's associated with has been turned into a little chant that we use as kind of a prayer at the end of formal meals. And it goes like this. Buddha was born in the Lumbini garden. He attained enlightenment at Bodhigaya. He set in motion the wheel of Dharma at Sarnath. He entered parinirvana at Kushinara. So I want to talk about each of those things. Buddha was born in the Lumbini garden. The story of the Buddha's birth. Maya, the mother of the Buddha, who's pregnant with this child who's on the way, is traveling back to her ancestral village. The tradition was you go back home, you go to your mother's house to have your babies. So she's traveling from the city of Kapilavastu, where her husband was the king, really the elected chieftain, and she's traveling back to the village of her own childhood to her mother's house to have her baby. And along the way, she goes into labor. And she's not going to make it there. And she's going to have this child along the way. It sounds like an episode from a medical show on TV, right? We're going to have this baby right now, whether you like it or not. And they happen to be near this place called Lumbini, which was a forest. It was a garden. So they stop at the forest. Her people who are traveling with her, her cortege, they stop in the garden. Some versions of this say specifically that there was a grove of trees, what are called, in Sanskrit, they're called shala trees. Shorea robusta, it's a real kind of tree, right? That's the scientific name for it. And the tradition says she went into this grove of trees and her labor pains are taking her and she's about to give birth. And the trees, being aware of the important thing that was about to happen in their presence, bent their limbs down so that she could reach up and hold on to the limbs to support her during the delivery of this child. So the future Buddha was midwifed by trees. He attained enlightenment at Bodhi Gaya. Probably everybody, even people who don't know a lot about Buddhism, know that there's a tree involved in this story. When the Buddha realized that his years of hard ascetic practice, his 6 years of starving himself and not sleeping and living outdoors and not cutting his hair and just living a very, very hard ascetic life, had gotten him no closer to solving the problems that he set out to try to answer when he left his home, when he left his father's home, when he cut off his princely long hair and took off his fine clothes and put on the robes of a beggar and started to wander around the countryside. The goal was to solve the problem of suffering. And he realized all he had done in 6 years was to make himself suffer more and had gotten no closer to solving the problem, no closer to answering the questions. So he ate a simple meal provided by a local young lady in the local area, gave him a meal of rice milk. And he had this realization of what now we refer to as the middle way, right? That the life of hedonism and pleasure that he'd lived as a young man got him nowhere. And the life of self-induced ascetic suffering he'd put himself through for the last 6 years had gotten him nowhere. And therefore the logical place was the middle, to follow the middle path. Like the tuning of the strings on a lute, on a musical instrument. Just tight enough to make a beautiful sound, not too loose, not too tight, just right. That's the goal. That was what he tried to do. And he remembered an experience that he had in childhood of calm and concentration. His father had taken him to a plowing festival in the spring as the fields were being plowed. And he was sitting under a rose apple tree. And he remembered this experience of watching the plow go back and forth through the soil and focusing on that experience. And his mind going into a state of calm and peacefulness. And he thought, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the route to the answer anyway, to try to achieve that state, to go back to that childhood experience. So he found a tree and he sat down next to the roots of the tree, a pipal tree, Ficus religiosa, another real tree. And he made an oath to himself that he would not rise until he had the answer to the question that he was struggling with. And he was confronted by, as he was sitting there, he was confronted by Mara. Mara is the closest thing to the devil in Buddhism. But really what Mara represents is our own ignorance. Or it was his own dark side. He was confronting his own darkness. He was confronting his own dark side. And Mara chastises him and says, who are you to think that you should be able to accomplish this thing? Who are you to think you can achieve this goal? And who's going to witness to this? Even if you do it, who's going to witness to this? And the Buddha reached his hand down and touched the earth and said, the earth is my witness. And tradition says the ground shook, right? So the tree witnessed all of this as the Buddha sat there through the night and had his moment of awakening as Venus, the morning star, rose the next day. And that was where he had the enlightened experience that led to everything that we do together. And the trees were the witness. He set the wheel of Dharma he set in motion the wheel of Dharma at Sarnath. When he turned his back on his previous life of asceticism, he'd been traveling around with these 5 other guys, these 5 ascetics, his group of 6. They'd been traveling together and practicing together. And when he realized that was not the right path, and when he turned his back on that, and when they saw him eating a meal, they were aghast. And they said, forget this guy, we're going to do our own thing, because he clearly has lost the plot. Right? He's off on some weird tangent and we're not going to be with him anymore. And they abandoned him and they left. And after his enlightened experience, the first thought he had, once he was persuaded, tradition says, by a passing God, that yes, you should in fact teach. There are people who could understand what you have to teach. His first thought was, I need to find those 5 guys. I need to find my friends who've went through this hard experience with me, this useless experience with me, and I need to share with them what I've figured out, this idea of the middle way. So he started following them, following the route that they'd been walking. And he finally caught up with them in the forest of the deer park, a grove of shala trees, the same trees under which he had been born, outside the city of Sarnath, which is also referred to as Benares or Varanasi, if you know anything about cities in India. These are more modern names to refer to the same place. So he found these 5 guys, and at first they were like, we don't want to have anything to do with this guy. But then they saw him, and they saw the look in his eye, and they saw the glow of his skin, and they thought, wait, something's different. Something's changed with this character. What's going on here? Maybe we should give him a minute. Maybe we should see what this guy's got to say. And the Buddha delivered his first sermon to those 5 guys. The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the setting of the wheel of Dharma in motion, the very first teaching that describes the middle way and the 4 ennobling truths and the Eightfold Path, and all of the core basic teachings of Buddhism are in that one sermon that was delivered there, his very first sermon, to his friends. And the deer and the trees were the witness. He entered parinirvana at Kushinara. At the end of his life, the Buddha was an old man. He was in his 80s. He was dying, and he knew it, from food poisoning, complicated by his advanced age. He lay down on his right side between 2 shala trees, the same trees under which he was born and delivered his first sermon. He lay down between 2 of those trees in a grove outside this tiny little backwater town called Kushinara, surrounded by the Sangha, surrounded by his monastic followers and bodhisattvas and lay people and mystical beings of all sorts, the traditional stories say, were flying around the place. And as he progressed towards death, as he entered the jhanas, as he entered a meditative state in the process of approaching death, the trees around him burst into blossom out of season, filled with flowers. And the traditional stories say, as he passed from life to death, those trees dropped their blossoms on him. So at the time of his passing, the trees wept for him. Throughout his teachings, the Buddha always listed the base of a tree as the first and most superior place for meditation. The Satipatthana Sutta, the Foundations of Mindfulness Sutta, says this: herein a monk having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty place, sits down with his legs crossed, keeps his body erect, and his mindfulness alert. That's the beginning of the Buddha's teachings about how to meditate. The trees are a wonderful teaching for us if we let them. As Ajahn Chah said, the earth feeds the trees. The earth waters the trees. The earth depends on the trees to hold their soil, to oxygenate the atmosphere, to feed and house the animals. And at the end of their lives, what does a tree do? It lies down and returns to the earth that it came from which the next generation of trees can grow, and the cycle repeats itself. We wouldn't exist as a species without trees, and we can't live without them now. The Buddha says one of the ways that you could think about a person is nama rupa, name and form. And by form, he means the body. We're this flesh, this bag of bones, this ugly bag of mostly water. That's a Star Trek reference. Nobody will get but me. Our form, our bodies, these make us creatures. We're creatures. We're creatures of the earth. We're flesh and blood. We're carbon and calcium. We're eaters of food from the earth. We're breathers of the sky that comes from the trees and the plants and the phytoplankton and all of the things on the earth that support us. We're dependent on the natural world. And that's another important Buddhist teaching, interdependence. Everything is connected to everything else. Everything depends on everything else. No one thing functions by itself, right? John Donne said, no man is an island, right? No person exists separate from every other person in the world, from the natural world, from the earth, from the trees, from the sun, from the rain, from the stars, right? Everything that's inside us at one point was in the center of some star somewhere in the universe, and supernovas that spread those elements throughout the universe that coalesced into us. We are the children of the stars and the children of the earth. We're dependent on the natural world. The falling leaves of autumn, as is happening around us now, remind us that we can't avoid becoming falling leaves ourselves. We can't avoid aging. It's a natural and unavoidable part of the lifespan. The bare branches of winter remind us that we cannot avoid death. It's the destination where all of us are headed. But the fresh green buds of spring remind us that the world's also full of life and hope. Sangbola Shipshio Mi, you, I, and all beings manifest enlightenment.